Hi guys, it's Caroline, and today I'm going to be doing my February wrap-up. I read 15 books in February, however, I'll only be talking about 11 of them here. The 4 others I talk about in my other video where I discuss the February challenge I gave myself and how well I did, and 4 books that I read this month went towards that challenge, and I give all my feedback there. So link in the description if you want to go and watch that. But I will be talking about the 11 other books that I did read this month now, and I'm going to get right on into it. So first up was The Kite Runner, which is a wildly popular book. It came out in 2004, I believe. Follows this boy/man throughout his entire life, and he's sort of privileged, and his family has this servant, and the servant has a son that he kind of grows up with, and the servant and his son are a different like sect of Muslim, which makes them kind of lesser than in the eyes of just like the general public. And it's sort of about them growing up and just what happens, and also about it has the backdrop of the Middle East with a bunch of different like political issues and like revolutions that are going on. I really enjoyed this book. It was a heartbreaker, and I like flew through it. And I really think it's like poignant, and that we deserve to have a lot more stories that are like in popular fiction about the Middle East. I did have a few critiques on it, including the fact that the reason why like the Middle East was so tumultuous was partially because it was used as kind of a proxy war for the Cold War between Russia and the United States. And while we do get the sense that there are Russian soldiers or like US soldiers there, I would have wanted a finger to more be pointed towards Russia and like the West for the mess that they're making in someone else's country. I thought it was really interesting and poignant. I do think some of the plot twists were a little bit convenient, and I took issue with that. However, they still like made me cry, despite the fact that I was like, it was a little gimmicky. I gave that 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I got to mark it off on my big poster of 100 books you should read in your lifetime, and I'm really glad that I finally got around to it. Next up is Felix Ever After by Kacen Callender, and this was just wonderful. I'm not a huge YA contemporary kind of person. I don't mind them, but that's not what I gravitate towards. But I just heard so much about this book, which follows a trans boy at sort of an art school. He's in the summer program, and he shows up one day to school to find that pictures of him before his transition, as well as his dead name, are posted in the school's gallery. And he thinks he knows who did it, so he decides to kind of go undercover and start messaging with the person who he thinks did it, and then like almost sort of catfish them as revenge. And there's just a lot going on. It's my reason that it got 4 stars instead of 5 is because you kind of are like, bro, like Felix, don't catfish this guy, especially because Felix doesn't have like any hard proof, but it is such a sweet story. Like the love stuff going on there, amazing. There is kind of a little bit of a love triangle. I normally don't like love triangles, and this does it really, really well. I talk about it in my in a video I did in February about different romance tropes and romance books that I think are good for each of those tropes. I really would recommend this. It's totally worth the hype. It's really true to like teenagers on the level of like swearing, smoking, drinking that they do. Next up was The Office of Historical Corrections by Danielle Evans, which is a collection of short stories and 1 novella that were just amazing. All of them kind of revolve around this idea of like history, rewriting history, but also just kind of viewing racism and like conflicts around race in a more like nuanced light. So for instance, one of the short stories is about a white girl who like her boyfriend gives her this like Confederate flag bikini. She doesn't even really like the boyfriend that much, and she wears it to sort of piss off her stepmom, and she posts a picture in it, and a girl on her like college floor like really finds it offensive, and it sort of blows up on social media. And this girl kind of digs in her heels where she's like, I'm not racist, like I didn't mean it like that, it was just a silly post, don't get so offended. And on one hand you're totally like, yeah, no, the Confederate flag, no go, what you doing, girly? But it's also all written from the white girl's perspective, so you see like how she wants to dig in her heels because she's like, I don't understand, because to her she doesn't like really get microaggressions. All of them were really interesting. The collection was really cohesive. I absolutely loved it. I have a review coming out in Harvard Review in the upcoming months. I'm really excited about it, and I thought it was wonderful, and I couldn't recommend it enough, and I gave that 4 stars as well. Then I listened to We Hunt the Flame on audiobook, and this was a disaster, y'all. This was an absolute disaster. I was really excited for it. It's I'm not even going to be great at explaining what it's about, but essentially there's 2 characters, and their names literally translate to mean the same thing, which that just goes to show you. Anyway, one's a boy, one's a girl. The boy is sort of the like prince assassin, and the other is a girl who like kind of masquerades as a man, but also does a lot of hunting in this sort of mystical evil forest. Anyway, they somehow meet. They're going after the same artifact, and basically the prince is supposed to follow her because she can find the artifact and then kill her and take the artifact. It was terrible. I gave it 2 stars. I hated it. First of all, I thought there was no sense of setting. So for the most part, like I read hundreds of stories a year, and I felt like this was taking place in a black box theater where only a singular spotlight was being shined on the characters that we saw. Like they told you it was on an island or wherever they were, but I still had no immediate sense of surrounding. Then I just felt like things were thrown at them. The love was super insta-love. Like basically the way they meet is he shoots the person she cares about with an arrow, and then like 50 pages later she's like, he kind of sexy though. And I'm like, both main characters seemed like the same person, like personality wise, despite the fact that they like had their own backstories and stuff, and that was really an issue. And I didn't even care about the end. I couldn't tell you how it ended. I remember one plot twist which I thought was bad and really cliche. I think it was poorly written. I think the world could have been really interesting and was a big letdown. And I just thought there was no distinction between the 2 main characters, and I found it incredibly boring, particularly for a fantasy, and the insta-love just like ruined it. The characters' choices didn't make sense. I don't want to talk about it anymore. It was really a huge disappointment for me. Then I read The Divines by Ellie Eaton, and I gave that 4 stars. This is basically about a woman who went to this posh boarding school when she was a kid, and then this girl, we find out at the beginning of the book that this girl in her year who was like her roommate died, and that basically shut down the whole school. And it follows both the present day storyline where this woman's getting married and on her honeymoon and like having a child, and also flashbacks to the year that this death happened. I really enjoyed the past like timeline. I think the present timeline was like way too skippy. Like she was on her honeymoon, then they were married a year, then she had a baby, then her baby was a toddler, and it just went too fast, whereas the past timeline was only like a few months. However, I do think it was really well written. It is blurbed like, oh, if you like Emma Cline and Sally Rooney, and normally I'm like really wary of those comps, but I think this, like, while this is not to their like caliber, I do think if you enjoy those books, you'll also enjoy this book. So in that sense, it is a good comp. And I do think that the final the final few pages of the book were just absolutely astounding. I don't often feel like the final pages of a book just like do it for me, but this like changed it from a 3.5 to like a solid 4 that I like don't regret, because it really just ended on such a like wow note. Then was perhaps my favorite book of the month, which was Concrete Rose by Angie Thomas. This is a prequel to The Hate You Give, following Star Carter's father. I won't give too much away because like it might spoil The Hate You Give, but basically Maverick, who's the main character in this, like becomes a teen father to 2 different children, and it's sort of about how he's handling that. He's also kind of under pressure because he's part of a gang, and he wants to like provide for his new kids, provide for his mom, and also like is kind of nervous about dealing drugs and the dangers that come with it. And just stuff happens, and it's really touching. It's really beautiful. Angie Thomas literally can do no wrong. She writes so well. Again, the dialogue is amazing. This is technically a historical fiction because it's set in the 90s, but it just feels really realistic. I think my one complaint, which other people have also complained about, is that both pregnancies happen off of having sex one time. And I know that like that's totally possible, and I'm not saying like I think that's wrong, but the fact that this man had sex once and then got the girl pregnant, and then again had sex once and got that girl pregnant, like what's like statistically, what are the odds? I did really love it though, and I think everyone should read it and read The Hate You Give. Then I read The Strange Case, the Alchemist's Daughter, which is the first in a series about these girls who are all related to men from Victorian literature like Hyde or like Frankenstein, stuff like that. And they come together, they're kind of trying to solve a mystery of this society, des Alchemistes, which all their fathers were a part of, and they're just coming together to know each other. I thought it was really sweet and fun. My issue was there's a lot of just exposition of these girls' backstories, and I think that I'm hoping that in the next 2 books, this kind of exposition that has nothing to do with the present story will be much, there will be much less of it going forward, because now we're actually introduced to these characters. Because I did enjoy the style, which is that one of the girls is writing this book and the other girls chime in occasionally if they disagree with how she's presenting the case or whatever. Sherlock and Watson are a part of it, and it's really fast paced, and I really like the references to Victorian literature. I'm just really looking forward to the 2nd and 3rd installment in this, because I think they'll be less won't have the main issue that I had with the first book. Then I read The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, which is about this girl who is growing up with her older half-sister, doesn't really have contact with her father. I think her mother's dead, and they're fairly poor. And one day she finds out she has been gifted the inheritance of this really wealthy man, just out of nowhere, and he gives her his billions and billions. But she has to live in his house for 1 whole year, and so do his 4 grandsons and his 2 daughters, none of whom are particularly happy that she has all the money. And there's also sort of this game afoot, and different people have different ideas on why this guy is even putting this game forward. I'm not sure we have all the answers now that I've read the first book. There is a 2nd book coming out later this year. I did like the mystery. I did enjoy some of the dynamics. I did find some of it to be meh. I think it got slow in parts. I also kind of don't like the Truly Devious-esque thing where it's a YA contemporary mystery and then we don't get the answer at the end of the book. I feel a little bit I just wish she would have wrapped it up and told me what's going on. And I gave it 3 stars just because some of it was a little bit out there and unbelievable, and I found some of her choices to be annoying. But otherwise, it was fun. I'm going to read the 2nd one because I want to know what happens. Then I read 400 Souls, which is an anthology edited by Ibram X. Kendi. And basically what he did is he gathered together a bunch of Black writers, and he told each person to write a 5-year essay on a 5-year section of history, starting from 1619 all the way up to 2019, because that was the first documented case of a African in America. So it was sort of the 400-year history of Black people in America, which I found really interesting. My issue, and the reason I gave it 4 stars instead of 5, was the first 100 years worth of essays felt fairly repetitive, just because I think they suffer from the fact that there's only so many historical documents, particularly about Black people. We don't have a lot of firsthand accounts. We don't really have a lot of information. So some of the 5-year histories felt really repetitive, or were saying a lot of the same information or making similar points. However, once we got further on in history, each bit became so wildly different because they just were able to talk about different topics and relate it back to something that was happening there. I really like the ones that took some broader topic and then related it to one historical person who was living during that time period. Those I really enjoyed. And so this book really picked up steam about 30% through. And from then on out, I was just having a really great time with it. So I would really recommend it. I think the full cast audiobook is a big recommend from me. Okay, almost to the end. I also read Home Before Dark by Riley Sager, which is about a girl who, when she was very young, she went to this her parents and her moved into a house. It turned out to be haunted and they fled. She doesn't remember any of it. And her father went on to write this really famous book about their time at this haunted house. And she doesn't remember anything that's in the book. She's always thought it was a hoax, that her dad just did it to make money or some other scheme. She doesn't know. But basically, at the beginning of the book, her father dies and leaves the house to her. Her mother's don't go to this house. But she's an interior designer and she flips houses for a living. So she decides decides to go solve this mystery of figure out what really happened for those like 10 days that they lived there and flip the house. And I found it interesting. I thought the reveal and like the final ending was really good. It kept me on my toes. It actually like had my heart racing at certain points, which not all mysteries and thrillers like actually achieve that for me. Like I honestly was anxious during certain parts of it. Again, like it's no literary masterpiece, and there were some issues just in like a structural sense. For instance, at the beginning, we're sort of given this character who's like the co-owner of the business, the like house flipping business of the main character, and she's a friend, and she sort of touches base a few times, but for the most part, she's not even there. And I just thought there could have either like that just should have been cut because it added nothing to the story. I gave that 4 stars. I thought it was fun. And then finally, I read Tweet Cute, which is a book by Emma Lord. It's about 2 teens, both who are in charge of running the Twitters of their like family's restaurants account. One girl, her family owns this like big burger chain. The other is a small deli. And the big burger chain has essentially stolen the recipe from the smaller deli's like grilled cheese. And they don't know it at first, but they're kind of like tweeting against each other, all while they're kind of becoming friends in person at school. It's adorable. I loved it. It seems really like, oh, in 10 years, this will feel really outdated because of the tweeting. But like right now in this moment, I was all for it. I thought it was really cute. And the romance worked really well. I thought that the miscommunication that they had felt totally realistic and understandable. It made sense why they had to be secretive at which parts, or why they felt like they couldn't talk to the other one because of like certain constraints. My biggest complaint is I think both parents in the end, we sort of decide are just like bad. They put too much pressure on their kids. I don't think they parent very well. And they also were like making bad decisions as adults. And I don't think that we really ever get that like super addressed. Like that kind of infuriated me enough to keep this from being like a 4.5, and it was only a 4. But I would still highly recommend it. I loved it. It was fluffy and it was like a breath of fresh air. So those are 11 of the 15 books that I read in February. And if you want to figure out how I felt about those other 4, or even what those other 4 are, links in the description. But that's all for today. Bye.